Hi, this is Ed Koehler with Extreme Networks, and I'm here to have a short discussion with you about security in 2020, particularly around the subject of securing the Internet of Things and industrial control systems within the network environment. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We're just going to talk about the IoT and ICS security threat, and we will then turn over to managing the overall risk. So it's no doubt that there has been a rapid adoption of IoT, and also most people are aware of the fact that IoT is creating new challenges in security. And statistics by Symantec reflects that, increased 600% between 2016 and 2017 as far as attacks on IoT. Many of these devices, we're at 20 billion today, but it's estimated really by the end of 2021, there'll be 10 times as many devices as there are humans on the internet. And many of these devices will be increasingly connected through wireless connectivity. So this is something that we do need to take a scope on. Organizations feel vulnerable. 81% said that the data breach could be created by an unsecured IoT device, and that could very well happen within the next 24 months. 97% said that such an attack could be catastrophic to their organization, and 60% said that they felt that their business's IoT ecosystems were vulnerable to ransomware attack. And these are all from the Ponemon Institute, and I'll go through some of the mechanics behind that, and you'll see why these stats are actually fairly accurate. And actually, this is a good thing because it does show an increase in awareness. And IT administrators, particularly those in the security arena, are becoming increasingly aware of the risk that IoT and industrial control can bring to their environment. I like to use this slide. It's funny, so I'm going to leave it up for a minute, but really ransomware and IoT are a perfect marriage in a lot of ways. When you think about a ransomware, normally you have to have some sort of human click on something, a phishing email or something of that nature, or you have to waterhole them, get to them to go to a malicious website. With the ability to compromise an IoT device, you can propagate into an environment, and if that IoT device is not properly segmented, it can affect the user community. So it becomes a very good avenue for ransomware, and that's actually been experienced in several environments, not only in manufacturing, but also in medical as well. And the threats are real. This is an example of an Internet of Things. Many people wouldn't think of a fish tank as being an IoT device, but in this instance, it was monitoring in a casino some very valuable fish, and the aquarium was monitoring it through a remote connection. That device was discovered, it was compromised, and then used as a pivot point, and from that, quite a bit of personal information was able to be extracted from the casino environment. And the botnet factor is something to consider as well. We all know that Mirai is not the only botnet out there, and definitely not the only one that you should be worried about. We're not going to go through a detailed list of those. I may do that on a separate video. But when we look at it, as I said earlier, when you take an IoT botnet and then you marry it with a ransomware type payload, you really get a marriage that's quite nice, because I can infect one, spread to the many, and I really don't have to have a human click on anything in order for me to gain ingress. Now, we've been watching Mirai for a while. It's been evolving. There are many forms of Mirai out there. New exploits being brought in, ransomware among them, new propagation and obfuscation methods, new credential for brute force methodologies. And the other thing is that the target list is changing. It's starting to look at infrastructure systems, enterprise systems such as digital signage, so forth, so on. Take note on the right-hand side of the slide, Unit 42 Palo Alto, IoT Linux botnets continue to expand their attack surface. They also are proliferating, both in their number and also, particularly as in the case of Mirai, the ability to morph into several different forms. The numbers reflect this. 34.3 million attacks in IoT in 2019. A massive ransomware attack hits Texas, 22 cities, and demand millions in payments. Capital One data breach, we all are aware of that. Now, the numbers below are scary. It takes 3 minutes to hack an IoT device, particularly one that has a well-known backdoor password. It takes over 6 months to discover the breach. These are not good numbers, and somehow we have to narrow this delta. And there are the specific challenges with securing the connected devices themselves. The IoT challenge is the sheer number and the types of devices. Many of these devices are put in. They're very seldom patched, very seldom upgraded. So we're dealing with outdated OSs, hard-coded passwords, backdoors. In many IoT environments, many IoT devices, it's difficult to patch against vulnerabilities. Web consoles that don't encrypt data. Upgrades in medical environments, if we're going to take the devices, it often means a very costly and time-prohibitive recertification, which not only costs a lot of money, but it also takes the device off the production environment, thereby reducing the level of patient care that can be given because that device is no longer available. Many times IoT devices are outside of the control of IoT, and I refer to this as shadow IT, where different departments may be bringing in different devices for their own purposes, and then they just don't share it with IT. So really, when you look at it, this creates a very it creates a complex scenario in order to implement a proper security posture against that. So with that, let's start to turn to managing the risk. Let's start talking about what it means to actually meet the IoT challenge. Well, fortunately, IoT is no different than the traditional security model and security posture approach. It really is a network journey. It's a living practice, and it's something that's very cyclic in the way it is maintained. Number one, get the basics right. We'll talk about that. Exactly what does that mean? And then number two, once you get those basics right, enforce proper security practices. Make sure you're consistent in the way they're implemented as well. Number three, leverage industry resources. There are plenty out there that you can leverage and use in your IT security practice, many focused on industrial control and IoT. And then number four, continued vigilance. Watch the environment. If you see anything change, if you see any anomalies, they should be investigated as soon as humanly possible. And with that, let's start to talk about enforcing security practices for IoT. Now, this actually is a set of 3 practices from Gartner, and this is actually very good because I've been actually giving these recommendations for about 10 years now. The first thing is device cataloging. Get an asset list. Understand what is in your network. Not only what is in your network, but what it's for, who owns it, who is administratively responsible, and make sure you're able to have a list that you can do a vulnerability assessment against. And that actually should be able to allow you to get some sort of network segmentation. And the thing that I want to talk about here is not only should you just take IoT and separate it away from the user community, but you should separate IoT from IoT as well. So in other words, don't mix medical devices with video surveillance, or don't mix building control with IP television distribution or any type of IoT scenario. And then the third thing is network traffic analysis and anomaly detection. And this touches on that vigilance piece that I talked about on the previous slide. Now, in order to obtain that, you really have to have security profiles that are based on whitelists. And I'm going to talk about that theory a little later on. And you should provide a list of approved devices and flows. There should be a signature, some sort of fingerprint that you know that device does, and then you should monitor that with L2 to L7 visibility and make sure that that device is complied. Any traffic that doesn't conform to that profile should be blocked. That fits as an anomaly, so anytime you see that type of an event, you should be investigating why the anomaly is occurring, because it's very likely that somehow that IoT device or industrial control system device has somehow been compromised. Now, while the scope of IoT is quite broad, there's a lot of different devices out there all doing different things. There are some predictable and consistent things that we can look at. First of all, the scope. The behavioral scope of typical IoT and ICS systems is very narrow. On this slide, we show a typical end user system, and you can see that the actual behavior footprint is very, very broad. It would be very difficult to write any whitelist type of profile against a typical end user system. Usually you're using a series of denies in order to actually constrain the user's behavior. When you look at a typical server system, such as a web or database, now using an allow list and a whitelist becomes a little bit more tractable, because there's definitely a narrower scope of behavior that the server should be exhibiting. Consequently, you can lock it down within that environment. If we move all the way over to the far right-hand side, we see a typical IoT system or an ICS system. Their behavioral scope is very, very narrow. So whitelist profiles really match well to say, okay, IoT device system, this is what you can do. You can do A, B, C, and D. You are denied any other behavior. And any time the IoT or ICS system tries to exhibit behavior outside of those scopes of A, B, C, or D, you should be investigating why that is occurring. So step one, get the basics right. Educate your staff and users. Be sure that your staff understands what IoT is. Many people don't consider the fact that the printer sitting in the corner of your office is an IoT device. And what do I mean by IoT? IoT is basically a device which has no direct human association. A printer fits that model. An IP phone could fit that model. IP television could fit that model. Video surveillance could fit that model. So the scope of IoT is actually quite broad. Be sure your staff understands what IoT is, particularly if they plan on bringing it into the environment. Make sure they understand which systems in their environment qualify as IoT. Make sure they go through proper procedures for onboarding those devices, and make sure that the IT environment, particularly the IT security environment, is aware of these devices coming in. And be sure to include the OT and ICS systems if you are in production and manufacturing, obviously. Have a proper asset control of your environment. So understand the assets according to the type, the operation, understand the normal behavior scope of those systems, and then perform risk assessments on the specific IoT type and vendor in question. Segment the IoT and ICS systems from common end user domains. And again, separate IT systems from IoT systems, separate IoT systems of one type from another, and the same thing with industrial control. Remember that proper segmentation practices can provide upwards of 90% protection of attacks. Step number 2, enforce proper security practices. I'm actually listing here top 10 network security best practices. Extreme Networks has an ebook that is available that goes into further detail on each of these categories. It is available for free on the Extreme Networks website, so feel free to go up and download that. But these 10 categories actually, again, are to be reflected against the cyclic nature. Remember, get your basics right, implement proper security policies, leverage industry resources, and then vigilance, and the cycle just goes around and around. So you'll find that many of these categories or these practices are interrelated, which means that network segmentation really can't effectively be done without policy-based control, and you really can't have a zero trust approach unless you have some sort of network visibility to validate the behaviors. And all of this obviously culminates and touches on aspects of IoT security. Network segmentation network segmentation. In the event of a breach, segmentation is a difference between a simple incident and a complete catastrophe for your organization. IT, IoT, ICS isolation, again, limit and create segmentation between IoT of different types, as this case point example shows. Strong access controls into the environment, strong audit trails to show, particularly with wireless information or wireless endpoints, you need to know where those devices are. In the medical environment, rolling carts are often used. The ability to have an audit trail for where a particular IoT component is very key. And remember to do your segmentation in a tiered environment, because when you do that with series of demarcations, you can slow or prevent the propagation of malware. And also consider whether or not you need to actually connect the IoT segment to the rest of your domain of interest. Many times after I've had detailed conversations with customers, they have come to realize that they really do not need that connectivity and that they can actually access those systems through the web interface. They need display of the data. They don't need a direct corridor into the segment itself. And that increases your security profile immensely. Leverage industry resources. There are 3 that I'm listing here. The Cloud Security Alliance, of which Extreme Networks is an active member. This is a very, very good environment for anyone that's looking to enhance their practices within cloud for security. CI Security Controls. CI Security Controls for IoT. There's a little booklet and a kit that you can download that actually talks about the CI Security Controls and how they reflect against the common IoT environments. I highly recommend it. And then the MITRE Attack Defense Framework for ICS, but it actually equally fits for IoT as well. This actually talks about some of the cybersecurity disciplines, the threat intelligence, the ability to build red teaming and adversary emulation, things of that nature. Again, a very good tool. And remember, all of these are free. And they all have open society memberships so that you can join the societies. You can actually contribute to them as well. Continued vigilance. Learn the things to look out for, and don't wait when you see anomalies. In IoT, when a device changes a behavior, it is almost never a good thing. It should be investigated, and you should do it as quickly as possible. Remember, early detection can prevent propagation. Separate your domains of interest, but utilize common visibility and management practices. Utilize microsegmentation for separations of technology domains. Utilize whitelist policy profiles in the IoT and ICS domains. Use encryption whenever possible to protect data in transit, and then monitor the IoT and ICS systems to ensure normal behavior. And remember, even though you're doing the network microsegmentation, you can still provide common visibility and management. That's one of the things that Extreme Fabric Connect provides in ACES. We have quite a bit within our portfolio to complement managing the risk that we just talked about. We have endpoint security. We have segmentation and isolation through the use of Fabric Connect. We have cloud security, ISO compliance within our cloud, wireless intrusion protection systems with air defense, IoT security with IoT Defender and Defender for IoT Extreme Cloud, compliance, the ability to assist in HIPAA compliance, PCI compliance, and GDPR compliance, again, focusing on the network elements and configuration. And then finally, AI and ML assisted security to give that analytics and the visibility that we talked about to meet that vigilance category. Numerous hackathons without a single breach, and we plan on continuing that practice. Now, when we start talking about vigilance, I'm giving you this handy 15 indicators of compromise. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but do feel free to take time and review it. Remember that, there's a lot of these things that you can see. Sometimes if you see them isolated, they may be just that, just an isolated anomaly. But really, when you see 2 or 3 of these categories match, particularly against a device or a user, then that usually is an indicator of a compromise, something that should be investigated. So I give you this list. Do feel free to use it, and do use it and compare it with MITRE ATT&CK. I think that's really one of the best things that I've seen with this list and its use. DNS is a big area. Lock down your systems to prevent changes to local DNS settings. Lock down systems to prevent installation of third-party VPNs, particularly no split tunnel behaviors. They're very unwieldy and tend to be hard to monitor. Lock down your firewalls and allow DNS queries from local DNS systems only. Really, you should just block outbound port 53 unless it comes from a known trusted source, i.e. a known authorized DNS forwarder. Look for questionable patterns in your DNS logs. Queries outside of normal hours, queries using non-standard naming conventions, long-tail queries, things of that nature. All of that's indicating that someone's trying to walk your DNS environment. Separate traffic. I can't say that enough. IoT from users from data centers, IoT from ICS, and beware of Tor activity. And what is Tor? Tor is the onion router. And the onion router is basically an encrypted dark web. And it gives perfect, well, not perfect, but damn close anonymity to the subject users. And the problem here is that many criminals, many covert organizations, and certainly many cyber attackers use the dark web very effectively. So beware of that activity as well. And to a large degree, that should be really prohibited unless the employee in question can really demonstrate a good reason why they need to have it. Now, for instance, being a security architect, I have been known to go out onto the dark web occasionally, but I never use an Extreme device. I have a separate device that really never touches Extreme's network that I do that with. Expect more of the same in 2020, except on a larger scale. Really, this is the wrap-up here. This is not going away. Remember that IoT, cloud, and AI, ML, they're new attack vectors. As technology evolves, the attackers and the cybersecurity folks, they're only going to use these cyber players, i.e., are only going to use these tools as well, not only for good purposes, but for bad. The key is in managing the risks effectively and efficiently. Again, get the basics right, enforce proper security practices, make sure you're doing that consistently, leverage industry resources, and continued vigilance. Do not wait when you see any anomalies. And reach out to Extreme to learn more. Remember, genius is in the specifics. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the session. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your local Extreme team. We'll be happy to give you further edification. Have a great day.